the icy heart of Montana's Bitterroot Valley, a stranger's secret sparks a love that defies the frost. Will their hearts survive the shadows of the past? Watch to find out. The wind carved a lonely path through Bitterroot Valley, Montana, in the winter of 1876, tugging at the frost-laced grasses like a restless spirit. Snow fell not in storms, but in quiet, deliberate flakes, cloaking the fields in a silence that felt alive. Ezekiel Boon rode through it, his black wool coat dusted white, a slouch hat pulled low over storm-gray eyes. His mare, Juniper, plodded, steady, her breath steaming in the dusk. Ezekiel, a wheat farmer at 38, carried the weight of a man who'd seen war and buried dreams. His dark hair, streaked with gray, peeked from beneath his hat, and his calloused hands gripped the reins with purpose. He'd left the trading post early, dodging the saloon's chatter and the eyes of men with debts or grudges. Ezekiel preferred the company of his fields, his cabin nestled where the Bitterroot River bent like a lover's arm. The cabin's cedar walls stood sturdy, its chimney trailing a thin wisp of smoke from a fire he'd stoked at dawn. No laughter waited inside, only the echo of a life once shared with a woman lost to smallpox. He dismounted, his boots crunching the snow's brittle crust. Juniper snorted as he led her to the barn, its timbers weathered but warm with the scent of hay and leather. But another smell lingered, faint, human, like damp wool and wood smoke. Ezekiel paused, his hand hovering over the knife at his belt. A soft rustle came from the shadows, then a breath, quick and shallow, like a deer caught in a snare. He struck a match, lighting a lantern that cast amber light across the stalls. There, huddled beneath a frayed saddle blanket, was a woman. Her dark brown hair spilled in tangles over a patched green cotton dress, its hem muddied above mismatched boots. She opened her eyes, deep brown, wide with caution, and met his gaze. "I ain't stole nothing," she rasped, voice cracked by cold. "Just needed shelter. I'll be gone by dawn." Ezekiel studied her. Her face was gaunt, lips chapped, a carpetbag clutched tight, spilling a worn book in a tin cup. "No one sent me," she added, trembling. "I'm no thief." Her name, she'd later say, was Mercy Alder. He didn't speak, just set the lantern down. "There's coffee inside," he said, turning toward the cabin. "Fire's still warm." The snow thickened, swirling like ghosts across the valley. Inside, Ezekiel ladled barley soup into a bowl, his movements slow, deliberate. A knock, faint as a prayer, sounded at the door. Mercy stood there, bag in hand, eyes searching for judgment. "I'll eat and go," she whispered. He stepped aside, the fire's glow beckoning her in. What secret had driven her to his barn, and would it follow her through the frost? The fire in Ezekiel Boon's cabin snapped and hissed, its golden light dancing across the cedar walls of the Bitterroot Valley homestead. Outside, the Montana winter of 1876 pressed against the windows, snowflakes swirling like whispers of forgotten promises. Inside, Mercy Alder sat at the rough-hewn table, her hands wrapped around a steaming bowl of barley soup. Her dark brown hair, tangled from days on the run, framed a face pale and sharp with hunger. The green cotton dress, patched at the elbows, hung loose on her frame, and her brown eyes flickered between the soup and the man who'd offered it. Ezekiel stood by the hearth, his flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, revealing scars from a war he never spoke of. His gray eyes, steady as the river beyond his fields, watched Mercy with neither pity nor judgment. He ladled more soup into a tin cup, setting it beside her without a word. "Eat slow," he said, voice low, like the wind across the valley. "Ain't no rush here." Mercy nodded, her lips trembling as she took another sip. The warmth of the soup, the crackle of the fire, felt foreign after weeks of cold and fear. "I ain't used to kindness," she murmured, barely audible. "Not without a price." Ezekiel's jaw tightened, but he didn't press. Instead, he pulled a chair across the pine floor and sat, leaving the table's width between them. "No price here," he said. "Just a fire and a meal." She glanced at him, then at the door, as if expecting it to burst open. "My name's Mercy," she said at last, her voice steadier. Mercy Alder. He nodded once. Ezekiel Boon. The names hung in the air, fragile as the frost outside. Mercy's fingers traced the edge of her carpet bag, its worn canvas spilling a dog-eared book, a poetry collection, its cover faded. "You live alone?" she asked, eyes on the fire. "Me in the fields," Ezekiel replied, his gaze drifting to a pair of leather gloves on the mantel, untouched since his wife's passing. "Lost someone once. Ain't been the same." Mercy's shoulders softened, her guard slipping like snow from a warmed roof. "I lost someone too," she whispered. "Or maybe I never had him." Her hand brushed her cheek, where a shadow of fear lingered, not a bruise but a memory. Ezekiel added a log to the fire, sparks flaring like stars. "Sleep here tonight," he said, pointing to a quilt by the hearth. "Barn's too cold." Mercy hesitated, then nodded, her eyes glistening. As she curled beneath the quilt, the fire's glow bathed her in a warmth she hadn't known in years. Ezekiel sat in his chair, sipping coffee, listening to her soft breaths. What had she fled? And would it find her here? The dawn crept over Bitterroot Valley, Montana, in the winter of 1876, its pale gold fingers brushing the frost-kissed fields. Inside Ezekiel Boon's cedar cabin, the hearth glowed with embers, casting a soft warmth across the pine floor. Mercy. Alder stirred beneath the quilt, her dark brown hair splayed like a river over the rag rug. Her brown eyes blinked open, catching the faint steam rising from a tin mug of coffee on the table. Ezekiel, his flannel shirt tucked neatly, stood by the window, gazing at the snow-draped river. His gray eyes held the quiet of a man who'd learned to listen to silence. "Morning," he said, sliding the mug toward her. Mercy sat up, clutching the quilt, her patched green dress creased from sleep. "Didn't expect to wake warm," she murmured, her voice soft but steadier than the night before. She took the coffee, her fingers brushing his, lingering a moment too long. Ezekiel turned back to the window, hiding a flicker of something, unspoken. Outside the world was still, the snow pausing as if holding its breath. Mercy sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding her. "You don't ask questions," she said, eyes tracing the scars on his knuckles. "Most would." Ezekiel shrugged, his black coat hanging by the door like a shadow. "Folks carry what they carry, ain't my place to pry." His words were simple, but they cracked open a door in her heart. "I was promised to a man," Mercy said, her gaze dropping to the poetry book in her bag. "A merchant's son, rich, cold as the river ice. Said I'd be his by spring, whether I wanted or not." Her voice trembled, not with tears but with the weight of defiance. "I ran before the contract was signed." Ezekiel's hand stilled on the fire poker, his jaw tight. "He sent someone after you?" he asked, voice low. Mercy nodded, her eyes distant. "A tracker, maybe. I don't know how close." She touched her throat where fear lingered like a bruise. Ezekiel added a log to the fire, the flames flaring as if to shield her. "You're here now," he said. "That's what matters." Mercy looked at him, her guard softening like snow in sunlight. "Why help me?" she whispered. He met her gaze, steady and unguarded. "Because I know what it's like to run from ghosts." The fire crackled, filling the silence. Mercy set the mug down, her fingers tracing the book's worn spine. As the morning light grew, a shadow loomed beyond the valley. Would her past arrive to claim her, or could this cabin hold it at bay? The Bitterroot River shimmered under a brittle Montana sky in the winter of 1876, its icy edges glinting like a promise half-kept. Inside Ezekiel Boon's cedar cabin, the hearth roared, its warmth battling the frost that clung to the windows like a jealous lover. Mercy Alder sat at the table, her dark brown hair tied loosely with a scrap of linen, her green cotton dress catching the fire's glow. She turned the pages of her poetry book, her brown eyes tracing lines of Whitman as if they could anchor her to this fleeting haven. Across the room, Ezekiel mended a leather harness, His flannel shirt stretched taut over shoulders that bore the weight of battles long past. His gray eyes flicked to Mercy, noting the way her fingers trembled not from cold but from a truth she hadn't yet spoken. "You read those words like they're a map," Ezekiel said, his voice a low rumble, like the river beyond his fields. Mercy's lips curved, a ghost of a smile. "They're the only thing I own that's still mine," she replied, closing the book. She stood, moving to the window, her silhouette sharp against the snow-draped valley. "Back in Ohio, my father sold everything, my mother's locket, my choices, to a man who saw me as a ledger entry." Her voice cracked, raw with memory. "Caleb Warwick, the merchant's son. He wanted a wife to parade, not to love." Ezekiel set the harness aside, his hand stilling. "And you ran," he said, not a question but a truth he recognized. Mercy nodded, her gaze distant. "Took a stagecoach west, then walked when the money ran dry. Caleb's men are out there, hired hands, not law. They don't forgive a debt unpaid." Her hand gripped the windowsill, knuckles white. Ezekiel rose, crossing the room to stand beside her. The firelight caught the scars on his knuckles, relics of a war that still haunted his dreams. "They'll have to cross this valley first," he said, his tone steady as stone. Mercy turned, her eyes searching his. "You don't know me, Ezekiel. Why risk it?" He looked at her unguarded, the weight of his own ghosts in his gaze. "Because I've seen what fear does when it's got no place to rest. You ain't got to carry it alone." The words landed soft, like snow on the riverbank. Mercy's breath caught, and for a moment the cabin felt like a world apart, its walls holding back the past. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the poetry book. "I used to dream of a place like this," she whispered. "Somewhere the world couldn't touch." Ezekiel's hand hovered near hers, not touching but close enough to feel her warmth. Outside, a distant wolf howled, its cry slicing through the dusk. Mercy flinched, her eyes darting to the door. Had Caleb's men already found her trail, or was the valley's silence hiding a deeper threat? The Bitterroot Valley held its breath under a heavy Montana sky in the winter of 1876, the snow falling in thick curtains that muffled the world. Inside Ezekiel Boon's cedar cabin, the hearth blazed, its flames weaving a fragile shield against the cold that pressed against the walls. Mercy Alder sat by the fire, her dark brown hair catching the light as she darned a tear in her green cotton dress. Her brown eyes, sharp with vigilance, darted to the window, where dusk painted the valley, in shades of ash and indigo. Ezekiel stood at the table, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes, his flannel shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing the scars that mapped his past. His gray eyes, steady as the river's current, lingered on Mercy, sensing the storm, brewing beneath her quiet. "You're safe here," Ezekiel said, his voice a low anchor in the cabin's stillness. Mercy's needle paused, her fingers trembling. "Safe don't last," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the poetry book beside her, its pages worn from countless nights of solace. "Caleb's men don't give up. They'll burn this valley, to find me." Her words carried the weight of a truth she'd carried too long, and Ezekiel's hand stilled on the whetstone, his jaw tight with resolve. He crossed to the hearth, kneeling beside her, the firelight etching his features in gold. "Let 'em come," he said, his tone fierce yet tender. "This land's seen worse than hired hands." Mercy met his gaze, her fear softening under the strength of his promise. "You don't know what they're capable of," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Caleb's not just a man. He's a debt my father owed, a contract I broke." She clutched the book, her knuckles pale. "I was his property, not his heart." Ezekiel's hand hovered near hers, a silent vow. "You're no one's property," he said, the words cutting through the fire's crackle. "Not here. Not ever." Mercy's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. For a moment the cabin held them in a fragile cocoon, the world outside, reduced to a distant hum. Then a sharp thud echoed from the yard, a branch perhaps or something heavier. Mercy flinched, her breath catching. and Ezekiel rose, knife in hand, peering through the frost-etched window. The snow fell heavier now, cloaking the valley in secrecy. Ezekiel's gaze scanned the darkness, his heart steady but alert. "Stay, here," he murmured, pulling his black coat from the hook. Mercy grabbed his arm, her touch urgent. "Don't go out there," she pleaded, her voice raw. He looked at her, his resolve unshaken. "I ain't leaving you," he said, and stepped into the cold. As the door creaked shut, Mercy clutched her book, the fire's warmth no match for the chill of fear. What lurked in the valley's shadows, and would Ezekiel return before it reached her? The Bitterroot Valley lay shrouded in a restless Montana twilight, the winter of 1876 wrapping the fields in a veil of snow and shadow. Ezekiel Boon stood in the yard of his cedar cabin, his black coat flecked with flakes, his gray eyes scanning the horizon where the river's gleam faded into dusk. The knife in his hand glinted under the faint starlight, its edge honed by years of survival. Inside, Mercy Alder pressed against the cabin wall, her dark brown hair falling loose from its linen tie, her green cotton dress trembling with her breath, her brown eyes wide with dread fixed on the door, her poetry book clutched like a talisman against the fear that Caleb Warwick's men had found her. Ezekiel's boots crunched back to the porch, the silence unbroken save for the wind's low moan. "Just a fallen branch," he said, stepping inside, his voice steady but his gaze alert. Mercy exhaled, her shoulders easing, but the fire's warmth couldn't chase the chill in her bones. "They're close," she whispered, her voice raw. "I feel it like a noose tightening." Ezekiel set the knife on the table, his scarred hands deliberate as he pulled a chair beside her. "Let 'em try," he said, his tone a quiet vow. "This valley's my home, ain't no one taking what's here." Mercy's fingers traced the book's spine, her eyes distant. "Caleb's men don't ask permission," she said. "They burned a neighbor's barn for less than what I've done." Her words hung heavy, a confession of the chaos she'd fled. Ezekiel leaned closer, the firelight carving his face in sharp relief. "You didn't do wrong by running," he said. "You chose yourself. That's more than most." Mercy looked at him, her fear pierced by a flicker of wonder. "You make it sound simple," she murmured. "It ain't," Ezekiel replied, his voice softening, "but it's worth it." His hand brushed hers, not grasping but resting close, a silent tether. For a moment the cabin felt like a fortress, its cedar walls holding back the world. Then a sharp clatter of hooves broke the dusk, urgent and unyielding. Mercy froze, her breath catching, and Ezekiel rose, grabbing his rifle from the wall. "Stay low," he said, moving to the window. Outside, a rider emerged from the snow, his coat dark and slick with frost, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He reined his horse at the fence, his voice cutting through the wind. "Boon, got word of a runaway. Woman, brown hair, wanted for breaking a bond." Ezekiel's grip tightened on the rifle, his heart pounding with a fury he hadn't felt since the war. "Ain't no runaways here," he called back, his voice cold as the river ice. The rider lingered, his horse pawing the snow, then turned and vanished into the dark. Mercy sank to the floor, her book slipping from her hands. Ezekiel knelt beside her, his presence a shield. "He's gone," he said, but his eyes stayed on the window. Had the rider believed him? Or was the valley now a trap closing around them both? The Bitterroot Valley stirred under a tentative Montana dawn in the winter of 1876, the snow softening as the first whispers of spring teased the river's edge. Inside Ezekiel Boon's cedar cabin, the hearth glowed with a steady warmth, its light weaving a fragile cocoon around the two souls within. Mercy Alder sat at the table, her dark brown hair braided loosely, her green cotton dress mended with careful stitches. Her brown eyes, once shadowed by fear, now held a quiet resolve as she traced the worn cover of her poetry book. Ezekiel stood by the door, his flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, his gray eyes scanning the fields for any sign of Caleb Warwick's hired hands. His black coat hung on its hook, a silent sentinel, but his heart was no longer guarded. "You haven't slept?" Mercy said, her voice soft as the morning light. Ezekiel turned, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Sleep's overrated when there's something worth watching, he replied, his gaze settling on her. Mercy's cheeks warmed, and she looked down, her fingers brushing the book's spine. I've been running so long I forgot what it's like to be seen, she murmured. Ezekiel crossed the room, pulling a small wooden box from a shelf. Its lid, carved with a simple star, creaked as he opened it, revealing a delicate silver hairpin, its edges softened by time. Belonged to my wife, he said, his voice thick. She'd wanted to find a new home. Mercy's breath caught as he placed the hairpin in her palm, his scarred fingers lingering against hers. I can't take this, she whispered, but her eyes betrayed her longing. You can, Ezekiel said, his tone unwavering. It's not about replacing what's gone. It's about building what's here. The words landed like a vow, and Mercy's guard crumbled, her heart opening like a flower under the thaw. I was taught to want nothing, she said, her voice trembling with truth. Caleb wanted my name. My father wanted his gold. But you want me. Ezekiel knelt beside her, his presence a quiet strength. I want you to choose, Mercy, he said, his gray eyes searching hers. Stay because you want to, not because you're running. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled, a fragile, radiant thing. I'm tired of running, she whispered, slipping the hairpin into her braid. The fire crackled, sealing the moment in its glow, and for the first time the cabin felt like more than a shelter. It felt like home. But outside, the valley held its secrets. A faint trail of hoofprints marred the snow near the river, unnoticed, in the dawn's haze. Mercy stood, her hand brushing Ezekiel's as they moved to the window, their silhouettes entwined against the light. If I stay, she said, her voice steady, what comes next? Ezekiel's answer was a silent promise, but the hoofprints whispered a warning. Had Caleb's men returned, or was a greater reckoning waiting in the wings? The Bitterroot Valley awoke under a fragile Montana spring in 1876, the snow melting into rivulets that sang of renewal along the river's edge. Inside Ezekiel Boon's cedar cabin, the hearth burned low, its embers casting a golden halo over the room where two hearts had found refuge. Mercy Alder stood by the table, her dark brown hair woven with the silver hairpin, its delicate curves gleaming against her green cotton dress. Her brown eyes, once clouded by fear, now shone with a quiet courage. Ezekiel, his flannel shirt pressed smooth, knelt by the fire, carving a simple wooden ring from cedar, his gray eyes soft with purpose. The valley's dawn light streamed through the window, bathing them in a promise as tender as the budding willows outside. You don't have to do this, Mercy said, her voice a gentle melody, her fingers brushing the poetry book that had carried her through darker days. Ezekiel rose, the ring cradled in his scarred palm. I don't have to, he replied, his voice steady as the river's flow. I want to. He stepped closer, the fire's warmth mingling with the heat of his gaze. Mercy Alder, you've made this cabin a home again. Will you stay not as a guest, but as my wife? Her breath caught, tears brimming but not falling, and she nodded, her smile radiant. I will, she whispered, slipping the ring onto her finger, its wood warm against her skin. The ceremony was simple, held before the hearth with only the valley as witness. Ezekiel recited a line from Mercy's book, Whitman's words of love enduring all storms, while Mercy vowed to stand by him, her voice unwavering. They sealed their bond with a touch of hands, no preacher needed in a place where truth spoke louder than ritual. The hoofprints in the snow, traced to a stray horse from a neighbor's field, had faded with the thaw, and Caleb's men, deterred by Ezekiel's defiance, had not returned. The valley, once a trap, now cradled their future. As dawn broke, Ezekiel and Mercy stepped outside, hand in hand, the river sparkling under a sky of endless blue. I thought I'd lost my chance at this, Ezekiel said, pressing her hand to his chest where his heart beat strong. Mercy leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "We both did," she replied, her voice a vow of its own. The Bitterroot Valley stretched before them, its fields ready for sowing, a testament to resilience. For those who cherish history, Montana's frontier in 1876 was a crucible of reinvention, where women like Mercy defied rigid roles to claim their own paths, shaping the West's heart. Dear viewer, if this tale stirred your soul, like, comment, and subscribe to join our journey through more Western love stories. Share your thoughts. What would you risk for a second chance at love? As Ezekiel and Mercy faced the sunrise, what new challenges might the valley hold for their fledgling love?